Welcome to the Middle East Institute. I know many of you are familiar faces and members. Those of you who are not members of the Middle East Institute, we certainly encourage you to become members and to join us in many of the events that we have, sometimes 2 a week in this room and elsewhere, and to support the Institute and what we do. We publish a journal. We have a library. We just got a big funding endowment for the library, so we hope to see that modernized a bit. We have an active internship program. We have over 40 scholars, of whom Greg Myre is one of our star Middle East Institute scholars, who often appear in the press, write articles for us, and generally carry out our mission, which is to educate and promote understanding of the Middle East, both here in the United States and abroad. It is really my extreme pleasure and admiration to be able to host this book launching of a really excellent book, which will be on sale downstairs afterwards, written by Greg Myre and Jennifer Griffin. Greg and Jennifer are what we called in the State Department a tandem couple. They worked in the same field overseas, in their case journalism, but I think here in Washington it's got another name. It's called a power couple. So they're a power tandem couple. They met in 1989 in the soccer stadium in Soweto on the eve of the release of Nelson Mandela, where 40,000, mostly Sowetoans, were cheering what they could see would be the historic change in their nation. And if that wasn't exciting enough, the rest of their lives together as a couple, as a professional couple, but also as a family, now that they're parents of 2 young children, has also been exciting. They have worked in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. In fact, they were in Pakistan when I was there in 2001. Their careers have taken them to Moscow, and Cyprus, and finally, the subject of the book, from 1999 to 2007 in Jerusalem and in Gaza, covering that period through a very interesting, eventful period as well, roughly the Bush administration years. They tell this story, a gripping story in its own, but as a couple and as a family, and their personal experiences, and I think you'll find it as riveting as I do. I'm not going to say anything more because they have much more to say about their own experiences. Greg and Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us at the Middle East Institute.
Thank you. We'll take turns speaking briefly, and then we'll throw it up to questions. We love the give and take, so please think about whatever you'd like to ask about, and that's the part we really enjoy. The book is trying to do 2 things. It's talking about both the micro level, our personal lives, what it was like living in a place that has just been saddled with conflict for decades. You can certainly trace it back to 1948, but you could go back even further then. But what sort of effect does it have on people? What does it do to your outlook and your psychology when you live your entire life with this conflict hanging over your head? And what we found very, very quickly, both in our lives and with the Israelis and Palestinians that we met, was that it's something you just can't escape, and it shapes you. Even people who wanted to get on with their lives, just go about their business, keep their head down, not get involved in the conflict, that you would get dragged in. Whether if you are a young Israeli, male or female, you were going to have to serve in the military, and that was going to draw you in many ways. If you were a young Palestinian, this is not a place that has a lot of sports stars or movie stars or rock stars, so you look up to the militant groups and think, which group do I identify with? Which group am I going to be talking to? You know, my friends are out throwing stones at soldiers today. Am I going to join them? So just looking at the way people are drawn in, the way it shapes everybody's life in the region. But we're also looking at the larger issue, but the way that interplay between the sort of personal level and the larger level. And I'll briefly just wanted to paint a little picture of what it was like when we arrived in Jerusalem in October of 1999. We got there having covered wars and conflicts in Africa and South Asia and other parts of the Middle East and in the former Soviet Union and Chechnya. And Jerusalem seemed to be the quietest place we'd been in a decade. The peace talks were going on. There had not been any serious violence in 3 years. Israeli police and Palestinian police were riding around in the same vehicle patrolling in the West Bank and Gaza. They were partners talking about this, how they were going to expand on that in the future. Every single day, about 150,000 Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza came into Israel, just like commuters come in from Virginia and Maryland here in the Washington area and go home in the evening. As we tried to drive around and explore the place a little bit, we often would be in the car and taking out a map and saying, are we which side of the green line are we on here? Are we still in Israel or have we crossed into the West Bank? You really couldn't tell. It wasn't marked on maps most of the time. There were no checkpoints. There were no soldiers there. You could literally drive, walk, go back and forth. And Gaza was a little different, but between Israel and the West Bank, it was really an open space. One of my very first days there, I walked to the Temple Mount, and everybody talked about, this being the most sensitive place in the entire region, the most volatile piece of real estate. And so I walked up there and go on, look in the beautiful gold dome and those magical tiles, and take off my shoes and walk inside. And, sure enough, as I expected, there were elderly Palestinian Muslims, the Quran open, legs crossed, sitting on the carpets around all over the place. But the thing that struck me was these 20 or so Israeli soldiers, not with weapons, not patrolling. They had left their boots and their guns outside, and they'd come in and were padding around in their socks, and they were getting a little history lesson, a little lesson in cultural sensitivity. Clearly that this was part of the Israeli military's. They weren't busy fighting anybody at the time, so they were trying to educate and sensitize soldiers to the Muslim community, the Palestinians. So this was the atmosphere, and it almost seemed like the negotiations that were taking place were just going to catch up with the reality on the ground, that these two communities were interacting, not that they were brothers or best friends, but that there was a lot of interaction, and a peace agreement certainly seemed within the realm of possibility. It seemed they were moving in that direction, and the prospect of going back to an earlier period of out-and-out conflict and confrontation seemed highly unlikely. And just at the macro level, at the beginning of 2000, you think back of what the situation was then. You had Ehud Barak trying to solve 3 conflicts simultaneously. He was negotiating with the Syrians, and they got to the point where it was very, very close to an agreement. Literally the point where they were talking about a couple hundred yards on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and Israel saying, well, we need a little buffer zone there. We need a little road that we can patrol. And Hafez Assad was saying, well, when I was a boy, I dipped my feet in those waters, and I'm not going to sign an agreement if I can't dip my feet in those waters once again. And so the diplomats got pretty creative, and as it turned out at that time, there was a bit of a drought and the shoreline had receded a bit, and they said, well, let's draw it on the 67 border. So Israel can have this little land buffer zone, and Hafez Assad can go to the place where he dangled his feet in the water. There's not any water there right now. And the Israelis said, well, what if it rains and the water comes back and we lose our buffer zone? And Hafez Assad said, well, what if it doesn't rain and I can't ever get my feet back in the water? So it didn't work, but literally that's how close you were